The world wasn't prepared when Jasmine Crockett's office received a direct diplomatic message from Ouagadougou. It wasn't through the usual channels, and it wasn't polite. It was sharp, clear, and signed by Captain Ibrahim Traoré himself. He wanted a debater. Live, uncensored international debate. The topic, Africa's future independence or continued manipulation. Crockett laughed when she first saw it. "Is this real?" she asked her aide, holding the envelope like it might explode. The French embassy got the same version, and so did CNN and Alezar. What stunned her wasn't just the audacity, it was the timing. With tensions rising between the U.S. and West African military governments, especially after sanctions and leaked CIA briefings, Traoré wasn't looking to negotiate. He was looking to fight on a global stage. Crockett, ever the negotiator, knew how. To work with power. It was an open challenge to everything. Speak for your people. That was it. No frills, no flowery language, just an unfiltered call for a direct confrontation. The White House didn't want her to go. The State Department told her it was reckless, but that only lit the fire inside her. She had faced her fair share of battles, but this was different. This was about more than a policy disagreement. It was about standing her ground in front of the world. They had to lead conversations, even if they didn't want to. We lead them. Her voice rang out with conviction, her words leaving no room for doubt. On her shoulders, the eyes of both the American public and the world fixed firmly on her. Not American media, but West African citizens. Ordinary men and women, young and old, cheering, booing, waving signs. Some read Traoré, defender of Africa. A moment where two worlds collided, where the power, a clash of civilizations, a confrontation between those who had held power for centuries and those who were finally daring to take. No smile, no handshake. His demeanor was as hard as steel. He wasn't here to make nice or appeal to Crockett's sense of diplomacy. He was here to make a statement. Crockett, in contrast, wore a dark blue suit, her eyes locked forward, jaws set like steel. Her posture was that of someone who had come to fight, but she wasn't going to play by Traoré's rules. They didn't even nod at each other. There was no courtesy, no niceties, just two leaders facing off in the harsh light of international scrutiny. The cameras turned on. The room fell silent. The world wants us to play polite, to pretend the U.S. and Europe haven't had their boots on Africa's neck for a century. Tonight, I speak not for Burkina Faso. I speak for every nation that's been told to kneel. Crockett didn't flinch, though she could feel the intensity of his words hit her like a wave. It was going to be about power, and neither side planned to lose Traoré, as words warranty, just an attack on Western imperialism. They were a call to arms, a rallying cry for the people of Africa. And yet, Crockett, ever the professional, stayed calm. Her gaze didn't waver. She knew the moment had arrived for her to respond. Adjusting her microphone, she waited for Traoré's voice to stop echoing through the stone-walled chamber. Her own voice, "You speak of history oppression. Yes, but are we talking about the past or the present? Because today the people of Burkina Faso don't get to vote. You do." The room stirred. Some clapped, others hissed. But Crockett didn't break her gaze. She had just thrown down the gauntlet. The audience was no longer just watching. They were a part of this fight too. The cameras were rolling. The world was listening. And Crockett had just taken the first step in showing that she wasn't here to back down. "I've seen your kind before," he said. "You wear democracy like armor, but your corporations act like kings. You lecture Africa while extracting cobalt, lithium, and gold from our soil, leaving our people with dust. So spare me the lecture." The room was hot with tension, the air thick with the weight of the words exchanged. A light buzzed overhead, flickering as if even the building couldn't handle the intensity of the moment. The moderators had already left. This wasn't just a debate anymore. Crockett stood tall, refusing to sit under fire. "If you're really for the people," she said, her voice unwavering, "then why silence your press? Why ban protests when they criticize your leadership?" She stood her ground, the weight of her words sinking, voice like a growl. "You build unity or you die. And I won't let foreign-backed divisions tear us apart. Not again." His voice thundered through the arena like a shot, shaking the walls and echoing. The minds of those listening, behind the scenes, U.S. diplomats were sweating in D.C. Analysts scrambled to revise talking points on Twitter. But it wasn't just words being exchanged, it was a global reckoning. Africa demanding voice, the West demanding control, and two leaders, one in boots, one in heels, refusing to blink first. Crockett smirked, tilting her head. "So that's it," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "You're at war with the world." "No," Troy said coldly, his voice lowering. "I'm at war with the lie. And tonight, I'm tearing it down." The room went still, every eye locked on him. The battle wasn't just about ideology anymore. It was about something deeper, something primal. And both sides knew that they were fighting not just for power, but for truth, or at least their version of it. No longer was it about facts and figures, speeches and policies. This was a battle for the soul of Africa. And Traoré wasn't he backing down. Neither was Crockett Dot. As the night wore on, the crowd remained on edge, hanging on every word. Crockett adjusted her microphone again, her calm demeanor betraying none of the emotions that were surely swirling inside her. She was in control of the stage, but Troy had a way of commanding the room without ever raising his voice. "You say you fight for the people, but every move you make," Crockett continued, "only deepens the divide. Your hands are no cleaner than those you accuse of oppressing Africa." Didn't he flinch? In fact, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, lips curling into a slight smile. "Is this the part," he said slowly, "where the empire calls me a hypocrite because I refuse to die unarmed? Is this your great revelation?" The crowd shifted, the murmurs growing louder. Crockett didn't let his words unsettle her. She was determined to make him answer for the contradictions in his rhetoric. "You accuse us of covert control, but you're aligning with powers that don't care about African sovereignty either." Crockett priessed. "What's the difference? One hand in your throat, or another in your back pocket?" There was a long silence. The crowd waited, breath held to see if Troy would break. He didn't. Instead, he smiled a cold, calculated smile that sent chills through the room. "Expose me if you must," he said, his voice calm, almost mocking. "Expose the battlefield. Show the world how small. Nations must choose between colonizers and mercenaries, and still we stand alone." The silence was brutal. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate before capturing the moment. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. Crockett had pushed him, but Troy was daring her to do more. He wasn't afraid of being exposed. He was challenging the world to face the uncomfortable truth. And then, as the tension mounted, Crockett made her move. Her communications chief slipped her a note. She didn't look at it immediately. Timing was everything. She had prepared for Troy's rhetoric, his fire, his history. But now she had something that could turn the tables. The world deserved the truth. Not slogans, not sound bites. The truth. "I have documentation," she said, cutting through the silence, holding up a manila envelope. "Just 3 months ago, you met in secret with Wagner Group envoys. You negotiated armed shipments while denouncing Western interference on stage. You were cutting deals in the shadows." The room froze, flashbulbs popped, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The air in the arena grew thick with the weight of what had just been revealed. Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't even seem surprised. Instead, he laughed, the sound deep and resonant. "Is this the part where the empire calls me a hypocrite?" he repeated, his tone mockingly theatrical. Because I refused to die unarmed, the crowd was divided. Some cheered, others hissed, but Troy wasn't finished. "You want to expose me," he said, his voice low but strong. "Good. Expose the battlefield. Show the world how small nations must choose between colonizers and mercenaries, and still we stand alone. And when they see that truth, they will know who the real enemy is." It was a M2 stroke. Not only had he taken control of the narrative, but he had turned the accusation back on the West. He wasn't just defending his actions. He was condemning the hypocrisy of the world that had forced Africa to make these choices. In one simple move, he had positioned himself as the leader of a new kind of revolution, one that didn't just demand independence, but demanded recognition and respect. Behind the scenes, U.S. diplomats were scrambling. Analysts were feverishly revising talking points. Social media exploded. This debate wasn't just changing the political order, it was tearing it apart. Meanwhile, Crockett stood her ground. She wasn't about to let Troy define this moment. She adjusted her microphone and leaned in, eyes locked on him. "You say you're at war with the lie," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the tension. "But what about unity? Doesn't your rhetoric divide more than it heals?" Troy didn't smile this time. His expression was grim, his voice unwavering. "Unity under what?" he replied, his words laced with disdain. "A handshake with the hand that holds the whip. No, Miss Crockett. Unity must be earned, not demanded." The crowd shifted again, the energy changing. The debate had moved beyond policy, had become a battle of ideologies, of visions for the future, and no one knew how it would end. The moderators had long given up trying to control the conversation. This was no longer a debate. It was a revolution unfolding before the world's eyes. The moderator tried to steer the topic back to economic cooperation, but the audience wasn't interested in cooperation anymore. They were fully consumed by the clash on stage. Even the translators in the booths hesitated, worried that a single mistranslation could ignite further tensions. But it was too late for that. The energy in the room had already shifted, and now it was just a matter of which side would break first. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from outside. The sound wasn't from the streets. It was something more primal, a shift. Crockett froze, looking toward the source of the noise. Troy's eyes flicked up, meeting hers, and then with a calmness that made the hair on her neck stand up, he said, "Do you hear that?" The room went quiet, as if everyone was waiting for something, anything to happen. Troy's voice rang out again, calm yet chilling. "That's not protest, that's awakening." The crowd outside was no longer just protesting. They were mobilizing. They were no longer just chants. There were songs, cries, calls for change. The streets had become alive with the sounds of a generation ready to take action. As the cameras in the arena shifted to capture the scene outside, the screen accidentally flashed a live feed from the streets. The images were raw and powerful, of people gathered, waving Burkina Faso flags, chanting slogans in French, English, and more. On a banner in bold red letters, the words, "No more puppets, no more masters," were clearly visible. The studio fell into uneasy silence. The weight of the moment was inescapable. Crockett set her notes down. She didn't need them anymore. The debate had evolved far beyond a battle of policies. This wasn't just about Africa's future. It was about the very soul of the global order, about who would control the narrative and who would be left behind. "This isn't a debate anymore," Crockett finally said, her voice steady, but with a hint of resignation. "It's a turning point." Troy nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. He didn't need to speak. His silence said everything. He wasn't here to win an argument. He was here to change the world. The camera zoomed in on his face as the tension in the room reached its peak. This wasn't a contest for facts. It was a test of conviction. And in that test, the real winner wasn't going to be the one with the best statistics or the most eloquent words. It was the one who could command the truth. Outside, the protests had escalated. The streets had transformed from a scene of unrest into a show of solidarity. Each chant and cheer amplifying the sense that something far more significant was unfolding. These weren't just protesters anymore. They were the voices of a generation, unafraid to demand what they believed was rightfully theirs. They weren't going to wait for permission to be heard. Back inside, Crockett remained in her seat, poised but shaken. She had come into this debate expecting to engage in a political battle. But now she realized she was confronting something much larger, a movement, a reckoning that extended far beyond Africa or the West. It was about the world's need to reckon with the systems that had held it together for centuries. For the first time in the debate, Crockett's confident demeanor cracked. Her communications chief, who had been watching nervously from the wings, slipped her a note. Crockett didn't look at it immediately, choosing instead to watch Troy. Weight of the note, however, felt heavier than it ever had before. It was a reminder that this wasn't just a political spectacle. It was real, and the world was watching. Crockett always wanted to lead with facts and figures, now found herself questioning everything she thought she knew. She was a politician, a lawyer, a fighter for American values. But she had underestimated Tory. She had come prepared with arguments with rhetoric, but not with the kind of fire that burned in his words. He wasn't just speaking to her. He was speaking to a world that had long been ignored. She took a deep breath and for the first time that night allowed herself to feel the gravity of the situation. "Enough of the games," Crockett said, her voice softer now, but carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. "We've heard the rhetoric, but what about the real issues? What about the people of Burkina Faso? What about the people of Africa?" Gaze never left hers. He stood still, his face unreadable, but the intensity in his eyes told Crockett everything she needed to know. "The people of Africa don't need your speeches," he said slowly. "They need action. They need to take control of their own destiny. We've been waiting for too long for someone to listen. Now we're speaking for ourselves." The words hit her harder than anything else that had been said that night. He wasn't just making a political statement, he was speaking the truth that so many had been waiting to hear. Crockett sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't prepared to be caught in a battle of ideology so raw, so unrelenting. This wasn't just a debate about Africa's future. It was a debate about the West's role in shaping that future. And as the night wore on, Crockett knew that the world was never going to be the same again. The debate that had begun as an ideological sparring match had transformed into something far more profound. What started as a confrontation between two powerful figures was now a struggle for the future of global power. It wasn't just about Burkina Faso, it was about Africa's right to shape its own destiny. It was about the West learning to listen instead of dictate. And for the first time, Crockett found herself questioning whether her side would be able to adapt to the changes that were